Welcome, welcome everyone. Participants are just trickling in. We are excited to start. We're going to start in 1 minute. Thank you. We have a sold out event. Alhamdulillah. Great. Okay, welcome everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the ever merciful, I think we're ready to start our event. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon all of you, and greetings of love to my siblings in faith and my siblings in humanity. And believe it or not, all 500 of you that have registered, we are sold out. So thank you so much for your interest. Thank you so much for the excitement. I think there's still more trickling in. I might just wait a few more seconds. Okay. Great. So my name is Dr. Tamara Soma, and I am an assistant professor at Simon Fraser University and a research affiliate at the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, located on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. I will be your host for about 2 hours today, but I am looking forward to being your sister forever. No pressure. I just like lots of chocolates. Anyway, in my work, I tackle complex problems, wicked problems, mostly in the realm of food systems and food insecurity. And at the end of the day, I usually come to the same conclusion in terms of how we can improve our food system. And that is worldviews matter. Worldviews shape how we treat one another. Worldviews shape policies and regulations. And I strongly believe, and here I'm going to show you my obvious bias, is that the worldview of Tawheed, or unity, that is so core to the teachings of Islam can bring us all together in peace in the realm of theology, despite our diverse perspectives. After all, one of my favorite verses in the Quran, among many others, and I have many, is, "And hold fast all together by the rope of Allah and be not divided. And remember the favor of Allah, which he bestowed upon you when you were enemies, and he united your hearts in love, so that by his grace you became as brothers. And you were on the brink of a pit of fire, and he saved you from it. Thus does Allah explain to you his commandments, that you may be guided." Chapter 3, verse 104, with Bismillah as the first verse. So today is a very auspicious day. And also we're going to talk about something that's very exciting, but can also be a little bit doom and gloom. According to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, we are only 90 seconds away from midnight. Midnight being thermonuclear war. The embers and the spark that could lead the world to a World War III can come completely unexpected. Drought, flooding, wildfires, and human suffering are occurring at a scale that is unthinkable, all of which are human-induced and rooted in greed and in an unjust worldview. Now, some Muslim scholars are calling people to come toward the middle path, a path of balance and a path of peace. And there are also those asking, some, not all, where is the prophesied Messiah and Mahdi? So inshallah today, God willing, all of us collectively can do our part to plant the seed of dialogue and harmony and challenge the forces of sectarianism and Islamophobia by discussing the topic of end times, the Messiah and the Mahdi, in a rigorous but in a kind and peaceful manner, as the beloved Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would have wanted us to do. So without further ado, I'm deeply honored to introduce all of you to 4 of our panelists, wonderful scholars from different sects of Islam: Sunni, Shia Ismaili, 12er Shia, and Ahmadiyya. And each speaker will have about 15 minutes, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A at the end. And of course, with the short amount of time, I acknowledge that we cannot represent all of the diverse school of thought in Islam. And so if you like this event, let me know, and maybe we can keep this intra-faith dialogue going. And next time, maybe over delicious food. Okay, so the first speaker, and by the way, my name is Tamara Soma, just in case for those of you who are just joining us right now. So this first speaker is known by many. Not only does he save lives as a doctor, he is a tireless fighter of Islamophobia and extremism. His YouTube channel is very cool, so I hope you will check it out. His name is Dr. Javad Hashmi. He is a physician ethicist, a PhD candidate in the study of religion at Harvard University, and research director at MPAC, Muslim Public Affairs Council. In addition to his medical training, Dr. Hashmi holds a bachelor's and master's degree in Arabic and Islamic studies from UC Berkeley and Harvard, respectively. He is currently completing his doctoral dissertation on the topic of jihad in the Quran and during the lifetime of the historical Muhammad, peace be upon him. And Dr. Hashmi specializes in Quranic studies, early Islamic history, and Islamic intellectual thought with a focus on Islamic modernism. And today, he will share the Sunni perspective, both from a traditional and modernist perspective. Dr. Hashmi, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me. This is a great event, and I'm happy to be here with this distinguished panel.
Thank you, and please feel free to share your screen. Thanks.
Okay, let's see if I can do this correctly. All right. So you see my presentation and not the presenter slides, correct?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, great. 1 second. I just need to hide some windows and I will begin very shortly. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So I'll start out with a less than controversial, or like I always do, controversial start. So in 2014, ISIS conquered the sleepy town of Dabiq in northern Syria and declared the beginning of the end time. And that was based on this hadith in Sahih Muslim, which led many people to ask, what the heck does ISIS really want? And what does this have to do with the end time? And that's what we're going to try to answer today. As a disclaimer, I will say that my views expressed herein are tentative and exploratory only. Some shameless self-promotion. I won't be able to go through all my slides today, but I hope to put out a fuller presentation on my YouTube channel, so please do check that out. And I'm also very active on Twitter, for better or for worse. Today, I'm going to be taking a historical, critical, academic approach to the subject matter, which involves a lot of deconstruction. But because I am a Muslim academic, I don't want to leave you with just utter destruction and demolition. So after all of that, I do hope to do some reconstruction, that is to leave the Muslim viewer and the student with something to go back with, as opposed to just utter decimation, as sometimes we do in the academy. And basically what I want us to do is to ask, what does the Quran actually say, and what did the Prophet Muhammad actually preach about this topic? So I'm going to skip through some slides. I apologize, I just don't have time. Now, if you want a more Sunni traditionalist perspective, then I suggest that you watch this excellent series by Sheikh Yasser Qadhi, which I recently binge watched. Now, these kind of apocalyptic ideas, the origins of them are thought to be very early on in Islam, definitely in the 1st century. During the Umayyad period, the Umayyad dynasty was viewed as very oppressive. And so there was this idea that a figure would come to this earth who would return justice to the world. And this figure is known as the Mahdi, or the rightly guided one. What's important to keep in mind is that many of these ideas are not found in the Quran, but are found in the Hadith, which often reflect, or at least according to Western scholars, reflect later political, social, and theological developments. I'm going to skip ahead. I apologize. A lot of this apocalyptic material was first put forward in 1st century Syria, which is not a coincidence then that a lot of the end times prophecies, lo and behold, all take place in and around this area. The apocalyptic material contains historical events that occurred in these first couple centuries of Islam, but this material is often repackaged by later Muslims. So it was repackaged during the Crusades, and then today it's also repackaged. We can just say, okay, the text mentions Rome or the Romans. Well, who are the modern day Romans? That's the United States or the United Nations, etc. And also a lot of this apocalyptic material talks about moral decay. Well, moral decay is always a problem, so this material can always be repackaged and repurposed. Now, I do have a lot of material text on the slide, and I apologize for that. Just look at the bold, and sorry about how much text there is. Now, the motivations for creating this Muslim apocalyptic material is the same as what is used to repackage it or to repurpose it. It's anxieties and concerns over loss of Muslim political power, instability, civil wars, unrest, and perceived moral decay. And if one knows that suffering is leading somewhere and is a part of some divine plan, then all of this becomes bearable. And that, I think, is the purpose of this apocalyptic material. These are just scholars repeating the fact that most of the material seems to come from the Hadith as opposed to the Quran, and is also reflective of the greater apocalyptic expectations that are being expressed by various groups in that region: Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian. All right. A lot of the same, but all of these scholars seem to note that this Sunni Muslim apocalyptic material doesn't seem to quote the Quran much, but it instead relies on the Hadith. And Western scholars generally tend to think that the Quran is what actually goes back to the Prophet Muhammad, and are more suspicious or cautious when it comes to the Hadith. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't use Hadith from a religious perspective, but I'm just talking about from a purely Western historical perspective. What I do want to highlight today, and this is my key intervention, is the disjunction between the Quran and the Hadith when it comes to what it says about the end times. The Quran, I'm going to skip ahead, sorry. The Quran is addressed primarily to the pagan unbelievers who expressed skepticism towards the hour, whereas the apocalyptic Hadiths are directed at fellow Muslims. And so the audience is completely different. Also, the Quran is an eschatological book and not an apocalyptic book. So we'll talk about what the difference between eschatology and apocalypticism is, although there is some scholarly debate about that. But the Quran basically considers that the end is imminent, the hour is imminent, and the arrival is immediate. So it's a one-time event. So the end is near in the Quran, whereas the actual end is relatively far in the traditional Sunni material and the Sunni view. So the traditional Sunni material is actually apocalyptic and millenarian. It's also cyclical in nature. So you'll notice that there'll be a rise of Muslim power, a fall, good times, bad times, and it's a cycle. Whereas in the Quran, it's this kind of one-time event. The Quran does not really narrate future historical prophecies. Instead, the prophecies of the end in the Quran are supernatural cosmic phenomena that describe the actual event of the hour or the day brought about by God himself. Whereas the Hadith is full of future historical predictions, which must be fulfilled by human beings before the actual end comes. So we'll talk about these minor signs now we're going to the Sunni traditional view, which basically has minor signs and major signs of the Day of Judgment. So these include the Prophet's mission and death, the conquest of Jerusalem, the early Arab conquests, the Rashidun period and the civil unrest, and Islam's struggle against the Turks. There are also all of these very specific historical prophecies, which Western scholars consider to be historical anachronisms, but they're extremely specific. So, for example, the Prophet is said to have prophesied the second caliph's martyrdom, the third caliph's martyrdom, the civil wars in early Islam, including even the conflict between Ali and Aisha, the Battle of the Camel, in which the Prophet is even shown to give this advice to the Caliph Ali or Imam Ali to return Aisha safely to her home. So it's very specific. The Prophet prophesies the conquest of Egypt, the conquest of Constantinople, etc. Now, there are also these other minor signs, which are more about moral decay, and these are a little bit more non-specific, such as sexual promiscuity, the spread of musical instruments. There's always an issue of women being nude, and just abuse and neglect of the rules of Islam. And so these signs of moral decay are always seen to be a problem. Now, between the minor signs and the major signs, it's either considered the last minor sign or the first major sign, is the arrival of the Mahdi, who is a figure or a human from the line of the Prophet Muhammad, who will be a just ruler, a caliph or an imam, who will establish this unified caliphate, which will rule for 7 to 9 years. So you see that the end cannot be immediate as it is in the Quran, because there has to be the Mahdi who will rule for a certain period of time. It's interesting that the Mahdi is not mentioned in the Quran or even in Sahih Bukhari or Muslim, at least not clearly. Now, after that, then you have the other major signs. So the first major sign after that would be the Dajjal, or the Antichrist. There are some sort of racial and misogynistic ideas behind this, that these armies of the Dajjal are composed of Jews, Persians, Turks, and Bedouins. It's also women who are overwhelmingly the followers of the Dajjal, because they cannot resist the very attractive and handsome Dajjal that you can see in this picture. Now, after the Dajjal, the Antichrist, the second coming of Jesus will occur, and Jesus will fight the Dajjal and his armies. And we even know where that battle will take place, where the Dajjal will be killed, which will be in, I believe it's Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. and then he will apply the Muhammadan Sharia and perform prayer behind the Mahdi. And this period will last from 7 or 40 years or more. So again, the point here is that the end is not immediate. In fact, you have all these reigns that have to occur afterward. There are other major signs. There's a lot less details on these signs, but there's the arrival of Gog and Magog, who are these humans, but quasi-human-like creatures that will wreak havoc and destruction on the earth. There'll be 3 earthquakes or landslides. The smoke, we don't have much information on that. The sun will rise from the west. The beast from the earth will be released. Again, not many details on this. And then there will be the fire. Again, not much detail on that. And then the trumpet will be blown. Now, so those are the minor and major signs. I've gone through them very quickly. That's the Sunni traditionalist view. What's interesting here is that the Prophet Muhammad in this view is seen to have all of the knowledge of the unseen or the future, not maybe all, but he knows all of the events that will happen until the day of resurrection. And this is repeated in various narrations, that he knows everything that will occur until the day of resurrection. This, I would argue, conflicts with the way the Quran portrays the Prophet's knowledge is much more circumscribed. They ask you about the hour, when shall it happen? What have you to do with mentioning it? And this knowledge it's basically said that he does not know the knowledge of the unseen, al-ghaib, which is interesting because the apocalyptic materials itself referred to as ghaiba. That's one of the terms that is used. And there are many verses where the Prophet is said to say that he does not have the knowledge of the unseen or of the hour. So these are many different verses saying the same thing. And it's stressed that the Prophet is simply a human being like you, and that only God knows the hour. There are several verses that say that truly with God lies only the knowledge of the hour. Now, the traditional Sunni narrative is that they restrict this to just the exact time of the hour, as opposed to the details surrounding the hour. So the Prophet knows all of the events that will occur prior to the hour, whereas he just doesn't know exactly when that will occur. But the Quran seems to be saying something a little bit more than that, I would argue. The Quran also seems to stress that the hour, when it comes, it will come suddenly, not with these kind of precursor events that are prophesized in the Hadith. The Quran stresses that the pagans disbelieve about the hour until the hour comes upon them suddenly. And so this is repeated, that it will surely come upon you. And the pagans are denying it, but there's no doubt about the hour. In fact, the hour is close at hand. It is the blinking of an eye, or nearer still. In fact, according to the Quran, it seems that the Prophet is saying that the end or the hour or the punishment of God will come in the lifetime of the Prophet, in the lifetime of his opponents, the Meccan pagans. The hour is coming. The hour is coming. It's repeated repeatedly. The day they see it. Here it says that the pagans themselves will see that day, that punishment, and that they're trying to hasten the hour, but it is, you shouldn't try to hasten the hour, but it's close behind you. Perhaps the hour is nigh, that it is close at hand. They wait not but a single cry that will seize them while they dispute amongst themselves, and the trumpet will be blown. And they will see it suddenly, when the hour comes upon them suddenly. It's talking about the Arabian pagans here, the enemies of the Prophet. The day of the imminent events. So it's right around the corner. And its portents, the signs of the hour, have already come. It's impending. They see it as far off, but we see it as near. For soon they will know. Never did we destroy a town, but etc. So it's saying that it will come now. So nearer to you and nearer. It's this impendingness. Now, interestingly here, the Quran is saying that there could be the punishment that comes on them or the hour. So the punishment and the hour are slightly different. Adhab and the hour is different. So the punishment is actually talking, and so here, let's look at the punishment. Do they seek to hasten our punishment when it descends in their very midst? So it's clearly saying that it's going to happen in their lifetime. They will soon see it. So according to the Quran, there are actually 3 types of eschatology or apocalypticism, you can say. First, there's the cosmic eschatology. That is the hour, that is the end of the universe as we know it. Then there's the communal eschatology, which is the punishment. That is narrated about past communities that were destroyed or wiped off the face of the earth. That is like entire cities or nations being destroyed, but not the entire universe being destroyed. And then finally, there's the individual eschatology, one's own death. And all 3 of these are typologically connected. So there's symbolism going on. Basically, the Quran is saying knowledge of the hour is with God, but no matter what, you yourself are going to die. So these are these 3 levels of eschatology in the Quran. So the Quran is saying that the pagans are going to be punished with either that communal punishment or that cosmic punishment. The Lord's punishment shall come to pass, an imminent punishment. All right. So I'm going to skip ahead. What's interesting is that the Quran does not mention the Mahdi, the Antichrist, or the second coming of Jesus. Now, there are certain couple verses that people use, but there's no clear mention of the coming of Jesus. And in fact, I think the most obvious reading of the Quran is that Jesus did die already, and that's what most Western academics think. Now, Gog and Magog is mentioned in the Quran in one passing verse, but it's one event that happens immediately. It's not like a precursor event. Similarly with the beast. I wish I had more time to talk about these two things, but I just don't. Now, there is some Western scholars who are talking about imperial eschatology, that the end of the world is coming, and so you need to engage in this kind of jihadic conquest. But I agree with Zishan Ahmad Ghaffar that actually what the Quran endorses is a theology of individual piety and divine mercy that portrays the only relevant eschatological battle between good and evil as occurring within each individual rather than on the world stage. Now, another Western scholar, David Marshall, thinks that the Quran shifts from God enacting his punishment to the believers themselves being the means of punishment through jihad. But I think he's only half right, because yes, there is this idea of the believers enacting punishment in self-defense. However, there's always this option of peace being left open and the punishment being lifted against the Arabian pagans. So that's where I push back against some Western scholars, and I say, actually, the Quran itself says that even though God's punishment is imminent, God also grants respite to some people, sometimes to give them more time to sin and allow them to make the case against themselves even more, but other times to open the door for them to repent. And so this is already in the Quran itself. And then what they miss is that sometimes the divine punishment is lifted. So so even though the Quran narrates the stories of the punishments of the people of old, the old community, the previous communities that came before, it's interesting that the people of Jonah were actually condemned to God's punishment, but then they believed and they repented, and so God removed them from the punishment of disgrace, and they enjoyed the enjoyment for a while. Similarly, Joseph forgives his brothers, and this is the statement that is attributed to the Prophet Muhammad when he conquered or walked into Mecca with his armies in a peaceful cavalcade, as Professor Juan Cole puts it, that he forgave them. So what I think, was Muhammad a failed apocalyptic prophet, as some Western critics might want to say? No, I don't think so. In fact, I think he was an uber successful prophet which is success actually ironically rendered moot the Quranic threat of impending end upon the Arabian pagans. And so the Quran leaves open the door for the idea that the punishment may be delayed as God's respite for the pagans so that they may sin even more or repent. The Quran did shift to the believers enacting that punishment, but then thirdly, and most importantly, once his people opened the doors and converted and submitted, this lifted God's punishment, and so the imminent end was delayed. And I think that's what we're really seeing. So there's a bunch of other stuff that I wanted to show you, but I don't have time. But I would just conclude with is that I do think that, I just need one more minute or a couple more minutes, which is that I do think that the traditional Sunni narrative is divisive in nature. It has deeply racist and bigoted language against Jews, Christians, women, Turks, entire regions of the world. Like I said, women make up the followers of Dajjal, as well as Jews make up. And this has been used by many people in the modern period, where we're using some anti-Semitic tropes. So especially this hadith, for example, about killing Jews, that when you find them behind trees, I think this is deeply problematic stuff. Racist stuff against entire groups of people. And then it's embracing this kind of clash of civilizations narrative, which is no coincidence, because this apocalyptic material was created in a time of conflict between the Arab Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And so this leads to modern day conspiracy theorizing and a level of hatred, and it can even promote violence. And I think it's really promoted due to our inferiority complex, due to our feeling of kind of inferiority to the West, based on our lack of political power. The other thing is, it's quite frankly, this traditional material is full of inaccuracies. The end of the world did not come. Constantinople, for example, is said to be conquered before the end times, in the end time scenario, but Constantinople was already conquered, so that's problematic. And clearly, if we look at this material with a critical eye, we can see that they expected the end to come all the way back then, which is why it uses Romans, or it talks about the Byzantine Empire. So it's just not accurate. And then finally, my last slide is that I think we should come back to the Quranic eschatology, because instead of looking for signs out there, quote unquote, of the hour, as if this kind of fascination that we often have, oh, look at these signs, or looking at civilizational conflict, where we talk about the United Nations or the United States as being the Dajjal, or et cetera. I think the Quranic eschatology is much more religiously satisfying, as it asks us to focus on the personal change in here, that is inside of us. That's where the real battle is going on. The Quran's emphasis is on the imminence of the hour, historically actually meant a fading away of the importance of petty sectarian divisions, and instead a fervent focus on individual piety and social action. Thus, we should focus on this moral piety aspect and move away from sectarianism and religious exclusivism. That is my argument. And most importantly, this is my last point, as pious Muslims, I think we should want to adhere to the Quran instead of later traditions superimposed upon it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hashmi. I know there's like so much. It's not fair of me to put it 15 minutes for anyone, for all of the speakers. So I'm sure you will upload that on your channel sometime soon, inshallah. Okay, so next we have a wonderful scholars whom I've had the privilege of meeting during my doctoral studies while I was at University of Toronto. I remember hearing his talk and it was excellent. Asante Sana, that's just my Swahili for Dr. Takim. Dr. Liaquat Takim is a native of Zanzibar, Tanzania, and is the Sharjah Chair in Global Islam at McMaster University in Canada. He is a prolific writer and speaker. He has authored and or translated 8 books. He is currently working on his 9th book on Quranic exegesis. He has also written more than 140 scholarly works, which has been published in various journals, books, and encyclopedia. And Professor Takim's research interests lie in the topics such as Reformation in Islam, Quranic exegesis, the role of custom, Islam in Western diaspora, Islamic fundamentalism, and many other topics. And his latest book, titled Shi'ism Revisited, Ijtihad and Reformation in Contemporary Times, was published by Oxford University Press in January 2022. So do go and get it. And so Dr. Takim will share the 12-ver Shia perspective, and the floor is yours, Dr. Takim. Are you able to turn on your video?
Yeah, can you see my notes?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. May God's peace and blessings be upon all of you. It's a great privilege and an honor to be here and talk a little bit about the concept of Al-Mahdi, or the Messiah, more specifically on Shia Islam. The belief in the coming of the Messiah signifies divine intervention in history. That is, that human beings are not alone, and that God is there available to help human beings create the purpose of creation. And the purpose of creation is that of somebody who will come at the end of time to fight against injustice and establish peace and justice on earth. This person is called the Mahdi, or also the Messiah, whose appearance, according to the Shias, has been foretold in many, many traditions, as we have heard. Why is he called the Mahdi? The Mahdi is one who is guided, divinely guided by God, and then guides others. The Mahdi has been mentioned in many chiliastic and eschatological Sunni and Shia traditions, too many for me to go into at this point. Many traditions foretell the signs or indicators before the coming of the Mahdi. Especially in Shia literature, although not only in Shia, the Mahdi will fulfill the Quranic goal. Basic goal of the Quran is of establishing upright, morally upright humans, at the same time creating a just social order. Muslims, generally speaking, are discouraged to predict when the end of times will be. At least in Shia literature, we're told, focus more on what you're going to do and what you're going to become, rather than when the time will come. For the 12 Shias, the Messiah is actually the 12th Imam. Shias believe that after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were 12 Imams or leaders who succeeded him, starting with Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then other Imams. And the 12th of these Imams is the Messiah, or the Mahdi, a descendant of the Prophet himself. The Mahdi was born in the year 870 CE and is currently in a state of occultation, according to Shia beliefs, awaiting for God's command for him to reappear. Now, people ask, what's the point of having a Messiah who is in hiding, who is in occultation? The Shias give different answers to this. One of them is that he is like the sun behind the clouds. That is, he gives light without being seen. Another common response that although he is in a state of occultation, he can guide his followers, especially those who are devout to him. There are numerous anecdotal accounts of people who have seen him, who he has visited, who have also received help from the Mahdi. Unlike Sunni Islam, the Messiah occupies a very central role in the Shia belief system. He is the one who will appear at the end of time, who will reverse all the wrongdoings. So the concept of wrongdoings and reversing them is very, very central in Shia Islam. Why? Because the Shias have always suffered, not only from the Sunnis, but also from non-Muslims, but especially through various periods of time, they have suffered from the Sunni majority. And honestly, all the Sunnis are like that, so please don't get me wrong. But there have been times when despotic rulers have targeted the Shias. So the idea of redressing all the wrongdoings is more central in Shia Islam than it is in Sunni Islam. Also, the Mahdi will fight the oppressors and establish peace and justice. Most of the traditions in in Shia literature state that he, that is the Mahdi, will appear in Mecca. It will be a Friday. Many traditions say that he will appear on the 10th day of the new year, that is the day of Ashura. For those who are not aware, the day of Ashura, that is the 10th day of the new year, is when Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, was slain and killed and martyred in Karbala. Traditions also state that he will accept allegiance of the faithful at the Kaaba itself, and that Gabriel's voice will be heard in the sky, excuse me, announcing his appearance. Since the Shias are a minority within the Muslim community, they've always looked forward to the coming of the Messiah. So he occupies a very central role in Shia Islam, contrary to the Sunni version, whereby he's a kind of a shadowy figure who will appear. They don't really know when he will come. They don't know his name exactly, except that he will call Muhammad bin Abdullah, whose son he will be. There's not much mention of that in the Sunni literature. However, that is not the case in the Shia literature, whereby he's pinpointed exactly who he is. The Mahdi will remove the suffering that the Shias have endured throughout their history, and due to the salvific role, that is the role that he plays in salvation, the Shias always pray to God to hasten the appearance of the Mahdi. Now that doesn't happen in Sunni Islam at all, and we'll hear about other schools also regarding them actually praying for the Mahdi or the Messiah to appear. In Shia liturgy, it's always mentioned that, oh God, hasten the appearance of the Mahdi and remove the sufferings and evil that we are currently enduring. So, for the Shias then, not only does the Mahdi reappear, his appearance will bring in a new order, whereby the truth will triumph over falsehood, that he destroys evil by fighting the forces of evil. And it's important to note that the purpose of the Mahdi is not war. That is, he doesn't come just to engage in warfare. Rather, it is the eradication of war. In other words, his period will see a period of a time of peace and fulfillment. He will not rule by force. There is a popular misconception amongst many that the Mahdi will come and go around killing people and chopping people's head off. That is a complete misunderstanding, because Islam, and the Quran is very clear about this, cannot be forced on anybody. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. If the Quran says that there is no compulsion in religion, even the Mahdi cannot go against the Quran and force people to become Muslims. On the contrary, Islam comes from the heart. So, in the Shia understanding, that the Mahdi will spread Islam not by killing and forcing people to become Muslims, rather through dialogue and cultural exchange. Some will accept him, some will not. He will only fight those who fight him. And therefore, a very common Shia prayer is that, oh God, do not put us in charge over one who will not have mercy on us. In other words, the rulers must always have mercy and be full of mercy over those who are ruled. The Mahdi then signifies a transition from the history of struggle, sufferings, and affliction to a future of spiritual and physical bliss. The Mahdi will also establish the purity of faith. In other words, he will establish the pristine and original Islam. Muslims believe that Islam has been corrupted through centuries by misunderstanding or misinterpretation of the scripture, and therefore you find often that Muslims are fighting against fellow Muslims, and therefore the Mahdi will re-establish the purity of faith. It is in this sense that he is a salvific figure. Salvific meaning that one who would help people to salvation. Muslims do not accept that they will be saved merely by believing in the Mahdi. Rather, the Mahdi will usher a period whereby they will go back to the original faith and will follow the original teachings of Islam. The appearance of the Mahdi will also be followed, as we have heard, by the coming of Jesus. The idea that Jesus was crucified on the cross is, for most Muslims anyway, is not acceptable at all, because the Quran very clearly says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. They did not kill him, neither did they crucify him. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا, and they did not crucify him for sure. So Jesus will come at the end of time after the reappearance of the Mahdi. Now, there are many, many traditions on both the Mahdi and Jesus. Not all of them are consistent, but in broad, is a broad outline and guideline. We can say Jesus will join forces with the Mahdi. Jesus will help kill the Antichrist, the Dajjal that Professor Jawad was talking about. And then the Mahdi himself will die 40 days before Qiyamah, or before the Day of Judgment. Why? Because the Quran clearly says that every living being will die. So even Jesus will die also, and so will the Mahdi. The only being that lives forever is God himself. The key function of the Messiah is that of establishing justice. In the West, I've noticed, I do not know whether you have noticed, but the West talks a lot about peace, but hardly about justice. We cannot have peace without justice. For true peace to prevail, we have to have justice. So therefore, we as human beings, even before the coming of the Mahdi, we need to strive to establish the divine plan. As I mentioned earlier, the divine plan is to create morally upright individuals who are ethically oriented, and to create a just social order, not just any order, but a just social order, a society which is based on justice and equality. In the meantime, while we await for the appearance of the Messiah, whether the Messiah is Jesus or Mahdi or whoever you choose to believe, we need to not only tolerate each other. I hear the term toleration a lot. I'm a bit skeptical of the term toleration, because toleration means basically I just tolerate you. You are there, I'm here, you do what you like, I do what I like. But I think we can do better than that. We can go further than that. We need not only to tolerate, but also accept and embrace the other. I would like to end now with a particular verse from the Quran, one of my favorite verses. Like Tamara, I also have many favorite verses. This one says in chapter 49, verse 13, Ya ayyuhan nas, and importantly, is addressed to the whole of humanity. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, we have created you from one male and one female, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila, and we have made you into different tribes and different nations, lita'arafu, so that you can understand and know each other. In others, we have been created different, not to fight each other, not to fight as to or compete as to who is on the right path or who is the right religion. Leave that to God. God created us, and only He can judge between us. Rather, we have been created different so that we can know and live with each other. I would like to end also with a tradition from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The Prophet was asked, Ya Rasulullah, ma Islam? O Prophet of God, what is Islam? And the Prophet had a habit of giving very short but very important answers. He said, Al-Islam huwa ta'atu lillahi وَالشَّفَقَ لِلْمَخْلُقَاتِ. Islam is to obey God and to be kind to all the creation of God. In other words, not only creatures, but everything that God has created, even leaves, even trees, deserve our respect and our mercy. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Walaikum salam, Dr. Takim. Wonderful. And now that you bring that verse, that is also my one of my favorite verses. And in fact, that is the reason why we are doing this event today, so we can get to learn and know from one another. And as you mentioned, Islam comes from the heart, and there is no compulsion in religion. So that is a very good message. And so thank you so much, Dr. Takim. I'm constantly learning from you. So our third speaker, my goodness, time is going by so quickly. Our third speaker is certainly a great exemplar and proponent of religious pluralism. His commentaries are always insightful and thought-provoking, even if I have to like go back and like, okay, let me think about this tweet again, like very thought-provoking. And so Dr. Khalil Andani is an assistant professor of religion at Augustana College. He holds a PhD, MA, and MTS degrees in Islamic studies from Harvard. He specializes in Quranic studies, in Islamic intellectual history, Sufism, Ismailism, and the global philosophy of religion. His book project is a history of the theologies and conceptions of revelation in Islam, based on his award-winning PhD thesis from the Foundation for Iranian Studies. And Dr. Andani's public scholarship is available on his website, khalilandani.com, also his YouTube channel called Thinking Islam, and he has published everywhere. So he will be sharing the Ismaili Shi'i perspective. Dr. Andani, please feel free.
Thank you so much. Let me just load my presentation. All right. Well, it is a great honor to be part of this gathering with everybody over here. My compliments to our host, Dr. Soma, for putting this together. We rarely see intra-faith discussions between different branches of Islam, right? It's often between some generic Muslim representative and Jews and Christians, but intra-Muslim discussions are on short order, and you and your institution are to be commended for putting this whole thing together. And I'm very grateful to be part of it. So I'm here today going to speak on a Shi'i Ismaili Muslim perspective on today's topic, which I've titled Shi'i Ismaili Eschatology, the Esoteric End Times. So very quickly, who are the Ismaili Muslims? Ismailis are a branch of Shi'i Islam. And like all other Shi'i Muslims, Ismailis believe that the Prophet Muhammad's successors in religious authority are a particular line of his lineal descendants, known as imams, that is, infallible, divinely guided leaders that are appointed by God. The first imam, according to Shi'i belief, was Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. And since Imam Ali, the Ismailis have followed a particular lineage of imams through Ismail, the son of Jafar Sadiq. That's why the Ismailis are called that name. And the Nizari Ismailis, which is the community that I belong to, and whose perspective I'm speaking on today, the Nizari Ismailis have followed a line of 49 hereditary imams in direct lineal descent from Imam Ali. And today, the present Imam, who is the 49th in the lineage, is Maulana Shakri Mal Husseini, known as Aga Khan the Fourth. And one thing people should know is that the Ismaili approach to Islam tends to be esoteric. And I'm speaking on an Ismaili perspective, but like all traditions, there are diverse views within the Ismaili tradition itself. So I shouldn't be taken to be representing all Ismailis or the whole community, but rather an Ismaili thinker's perspective. So let's talk about the day of resurrection. My colleague, Dr. Hashmi, has already done a lot of the work on this, so I'm just piggybacking off what he says. So I want to situate the Ismaili interpretations of Qiyamah or resurrection. And to do that, I have to quickly, in very summary form, talk a little bit about how Ismailis understand creation. So in Ismaili belief, which many Shia groups share, God is absolutely simple. That is, God's oneness can't be divided in any way. And God is timeless. And what that means is that God's act of creation is eternal. God is eternally the creator. Therefore, the first creation of Allah, which is called the first intellect, is an eternal creation. And the second creation, which comes from the first creation, is also eternal in the sense that it always exists in perpetuity. And the physical cosmos, the universe that we inhabit, which is a material, hylomorphic universe, this universe has always existed in some form, but it is still temporal. So our universe is going through change. And Ismailis talk about the universe passing through countless periods or cycles of evolution, that is spiritual and physical evolution. Now, we understand Qiyamah within this overall cosmological framework, okay? So to understand the day of Qiyamah, the day of resurrection, and there are many, Yom Adin, Yom al-Qiyamah, what does it mean day? So we have to understand the Quranic notion of day in general. And to that, the Ismailis point to the verse that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Multiple Quranic verses tell us this. Well, what are these 6 days? If God is timeless, surely God does not require 24-hour periods to create the universe. The meaning of a day, as we know it, is nonsense if there is no sun and moon and planets or anything like that. So the Ismailis understood the 6-day creation in an esoteric sense. It's not talking about the creation of the universe. The 6-day creation is about the creation or the manifestation of God's religion. The heavens and the earth mentioned here refer to the exoteric and the esoteric levels of God's religion. And the 6 days are not 24-hour days. They refer to 6 prophetic cycles, that is, periods of roughly 1,000 years, the beginning of which was inaugurated by a major prophet. And those 6 prophets are Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. So these prophetic cycles are the 6 days. The day of Qiyamah is not just a 24-hour period where the world comes to an end and blows up. The day of Qiyamah is the 7th cycle. It's another 1,000-year period that comes after the first 6 prophetic periods. And there are different levels of Qiyamah. So in fact, when one period of one prophet comes to an end and transitions to the next period, you have a minor Qiyamah. And the reason why that many of this is unknown is that according to the Quran, the Qiyamah itself is hidden. When Qiyamah happens, it happens unexpectedly, and most people are negligent or unaware. So Qiyamah is not really a physical event. Qiyamah is a spiritual event. It's about the spiritual history of humankind. So in fact, in the religious history of human beings since the time of Adam, who just began the current 7,000 years that we live in, there were even periods before Adam, but since Adam, there have been many minor Qiyamahs, right? Like the flood of Noah is a minor Qiyamah. The destruction of Jerusalem after Jesus came was a minor Qiyamah. There are even minor Qiyamahs during the mission of Prophet Muhammad when, such as the Battle of Badr and things like this. So there have been minor Qiyamahs, but after the cycle of Prophet Muhammad, there will be a period of major Qiyamah. And again, that's a 1,000-year period. This is at least within the Ismaili understanding. So Qiyamah has many levels. Even when you die, when you pass away from the physical world and you transition to the spiritual world in a spiritual body, that is your individual Qiyamah. But the Qiyamah, as far as human history is concerned, is what I could call a historical Qiyamah. And again, that's this 1,000-year, 7th-day millennial period. So the historical Qiyamah, the Qiyamah that we're waiting for to happen on Earth, is not the end of the world as we know it. It's not even the end of the planet. It's just a new era of human life, which will be characterized both by spiritual unveiling of knowledge as well as tribulations. Now, the Quran talks about signs of this Qiyamah, which my colleague has already mentioned. Now, most people understand the signs of Qiyamah as physical natural disasters. And while I respect that interpretation, in the Ismaili tradition, we think the literalist understanding of this doesn't make any sense, especially since Qiyamah is this 7th day when God establishes the throne, when people are receiving recompense, If God is going to invite people to a gathering, which is one of the names of Qiyamah, the day of gathering, he will invite them with good omens. God will not invite them by scaring them away with natural disasters. If you want people to gather at a certain location and you want them to come, you don't send them natural disasters, which scares them away. You invite them through spiritual signs. And because Qiyamah is a spiritual event, the signs of Qiyamah are actually soul events, at least according to the Ismaili tradition. So, for example, the first blow of the trumpet means that the Imam who's on earth at the time of Qiyamah will make an announcement. He will announce that we are in Qiyamah. Again, that announcement will not be recognized by everyone, but nevertheless, it will be there. The darkening of the stars during the period of Qiyamah. What does that mean? The stars lose their light. In the Ismaili view, what that means is that the different religious teachers, both within the Ismaili tradition and outside the Ismaili tradition, will sort of lose their clout and their authority within the world. The heavens are going to be skinned and rolled up. Well, again, if that literally happens, the planet Earth goes bye-bye and all life here would be done, right? Then nobody's here for the resurrection. We're all dead. The inner meaning of the heavens being rolled up is that parts of the Sharia, the outward religious law, will be abrogated and will become weaker, and there will be a spiritualization of human life. The shaking or the quaking of the earth here refers to human souls. It doesn't refer to the physical earth. So human souls will have spiritual openings. There will be spiritual quaking of human souls. The sun and the moon will join together. Again, literally, if that happens, say bye-bye to life on earth. In the Ismaili view, the office of the Imam is a symbol of the sun, and the office of the Imam's deputy is the moon, and it just means the two offices come together. So this is sort of the conceptual summary. What about, the practical effects of this idea? Well, it turns out that the 48th Imam of the Ismailis, Sir Sultan Muhammad Shah Aga Khan, on his ascension to the imamate in the year 1885, announced to his community that we are now in the end times. He said, this or these are the end times, and the terms he used is Akhir az-Zaman, which is just another term for Qiyamah. So the Ismaili Imam actually announced the Qiyamah in 1885, and he said the same message in 7 other farmans delivered in the 1900s. So throughout his career, this 48th Imam of the Ismailis made unprecedented changes to the interpretation of Islam as Ismailis understand it. His imamate was the longest in the history of imams. He was an imam for 72 years. He was the most publicly visible imam in the history of the Ismailis, and he was also a visible Muslim leader in his own right. He was a president of the League of Nations in 1937, and he brought many reforms that benefited not just Ismailis, but the welfare of Muslims overall. And throughout his life, he made these announcements using eschatological language. In a message directed to the Muslim world in 1934, he said the world of Islam is at a turning point of its history and that we must get out of it and begin our new era. In a later message that he sent in 1954, he said, the Muslim world is almost at the last stage, the last hour between a final collapse and revival. Keep in mind, it's during this period, the 20th century, when the Sunni caliphate was abolished after World War I. That's also a Qiyamah-related event. So what I'm saying here is not that the world came to an end in the 20th century, but that the transition from the 6th day to the 7th day, which is a 1,000-year period, that transition began in the 20th century. Now, again, from an Ismaili perspective, right, what the Imam has said is pretty clear, actually. However, we can approach this from a macro perspective. If we just look at the history of humankind in the 20th century, we find that in the 20th century, a number of unprecedented advances are made in virtually every sector of human life. This is why the Aga Khan, the late Aga Khan, said in his memoirs that his imamate began in another world, the world of horse carriages and candle lights, and today we are in the world of nuclear power, physics, and air travel. On this point, many scholars who don't even study religion have said things like the following. So Ren and Zai say, quote, the 20th century saw great achievements occur in nearly every important aspect of human life. According to another scholar named D.L. Serbi, more technology has been developed in the 20th century than in all times before it. According to the National Academy of Engineering, The quality of life in the 20th century improved dramatically owing to technological progress in all areas. The era of technology, we must not think that this is just the creation of man. The era of technology is the manifestation of some of the signs of God. At least this is how many Ismailis see it. Human life expectancy doubled in the 20th century. All the technological advances that we enjoy today, the most advancement that has ever happened in human history happened in the 20th century. Things like modern medicine, like mass media. The reason why we can have an interfaith discussion today is because of the advances of the 20th century, which also brought a lot of equity to human life. This is when slavery is abolished. This is when we have civil rights. This is when there's women's emancipation. So René Guénon, writing in 1927, so this is during this whole time, he said that there's a vague feeling that something is approaching its end. We seem to be approaching the end of a world, the end of an epoch. And other scholars like Christopher Shakula, who I've quoted here, has also said that the 20th century was a turning point for humanity, and it has proven to be a new age. Now, the last thing I'll talk about, I think I have a minute left. What about the notion of the Mahdi? So the Mahdi, traditionally understood, is the idea that right before the day of judgment, before the end of everything, somebody shows up and sort of fixes the mess that humans have made. With respect to people who believe this, this belief does not really make much sense from an Ismaili perspective. In Ismaili thought, the imams are always present on earth. Nevertheless, you have hadiths like this, that a man from the Prophet's family, Ahlul Bayt, will fill the earth with justice as it has been filled with oppression. Now, in the Ismaili understanding, we don't reject the notion of a Mahdi, but for us, the Mahdi is not some individual who just shows up out of nowhere all of a sudden. For Ismailis, the Mahdi is a role. It's a function that any Ismaili imam who has the means could actually fulfill. In fact, the current Ismaili imam of our time, Shah Karim al-Husseini Aga Khan IV, through his institutional work, is fulfilling the roles of the Mahdi. And he primarily is fulfilling the function of the Mahdi through the Aga Khan Development Network, whose mission is to relieve society of ignorance, disease, and deprivation, and established a just social order. And you can see that in the very work of the Aga Khan Development Network. They even had an agreement signed with Simon Fraser University last year, and this is a picture from one of those engagements. So the work of the Aga Khan Development Network, which is based on the imamat of the current Ismaili imam, such as building power plants, building 200 schools, hospitals, and clinics, providing drinking water for a million people, providing 8 million people with food security, establishing 200 schools and 2 universities. This type of work, which is going to continue over the entire cycle of Qiyamah, this, in our understanding, is the function and the fulfillment of all these Mahdi expectations. You literally have someone from the family, the descendants of the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, who is quite literally removing injustice and oppression from the world. So to conclude then, in the Ismaili understanding of Qiyamah and the end times, this is not the literal end of the planet or the end of the universe. The end times refer to a new period of human history where things are very, very different from before, where more knowledge is available, more technology is available, and these are blessings from God, but blessings can be misused. So this is also a period of test, and it's going to be up to us. Are we going to pass the test? If you've prepared for the test, the day of test is a very happy time. If you've done your work, the exam is enjoyable. If you haven't prepared for the test can be painful. So this period of Qiyamah, which is 1,000 years, is a period of test. Those who've prepared, who remember God, who do good deeds, who act virtuously, they will find this period one of great blessings. And others who don't live rightfully, who oppress other people, for those people, it will feel like a punishment. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andani, for your perspective, especially around the turning points and epoch. I found that very interesting, and also the concept of the imamat right now. I'm sure there will be many who would like to continue to learn more from you. So, and yes, How come we're just doing this now? We need to do more of this. Our final panelist is Imam Farhan Iqbal. Imam Farhan Iqbal is a passionate speaker on Islam as a force for peace and a scholar of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. I actually connected with Imam Farhan Iqbal in the past as his dissertation focused on a comparative study of indigenous spiritualities and Islamic theology, and I'm very passionate about indigenous issues. So Imam Farhan Iqbal is a missionary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. He received his degree in Islamic theology and comparative religions in 2010 from the Ahmadiyya Institute of Islamic Studies in Ontario, Canada. He has served as a missionary in Ghana, US, and also in Canada, and he is now serving the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat in the East End of Ottawa. He has represented the community in various interfaith events, on the podcast, The Conviction Project, that you can check on YouTube, and he's also a frequent speaker on MTA, which is Muslim Television Ahmadiyya, also on YouTube. He has co-authored several books, including Understanding Islam, Dispelling the Myth About Jihad, Oppression and Violence, The Quest of a Curious Muslim, and With Love to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, The Seal of All the Prophets. And Imam Farhan Iqbal, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just wanted to confirm if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. First of all, I would also like to mention that I'm privileged, very excited to be part of this program. I appreciate the intra-faith aspect of this program. This is one of the first times that I am doing a program like this, and I hope to see more programs of this nature. Normally, as the other panelists have pointed out, we tend to have programs with people of other faiths, but not, people from other representatives of other sects within Islam. So it's very nice to see this. As has already been mentioned in the introduction, and you can see it on my screen as well, I am going to share some points from the Ahmadiyya Muslim perspective on this topic, the Messiah, the Mahdi, and the end times in Islam. We as Ahmadi Muslims consider the coming of the Messiah to be a great event in the history of Islam. The coming of the Messiah and Mahdi is prophesied to be a time for the rejuvenation of Islam, and other speakers have mentioned this as well, and the spread of the peaceful and rational message of Islam to every corner of the world. And we also believe that the era of the Messiah and Mahdi will bring peace and unity between different nations and religions, but in particular unity within the Muslim ummah through the institution of khilafat, or spiritual caliphate. Due to the importance of this unique event for the reformation of Muslims and the recognition of the true peaceful teachings of Islam, Ahmadi Muslims believe that the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has provided us all the necessary details for people to recognize and acknowledge and believe in the Messiah and Mahdi. So all the things that we need have been provided to us, have been given to us. In this presentation, it is very brief, so I will go through some prophecies, the types of prophecies that pertain to the Messiah and the Mahdi and the end times. And I will also try to discuss a little bit about whether or not we are in the end times. And then I will proceed in the end to talk about who the Messiah and Mahdi is from the Ahmadiyya Muslim perspective. Firstly, when we look at the prophecies regarding the Messiah and Mahdi, they can be divided into three parts, three types. There are prophecies that tell us the time of the coming of the Messiah. There are prophecies that tell us the place of the coming of the Messiah. And there are prophecies that tell us the signs, that give us the signs of the coming of the Messiah. They tell us what is going to happen at that time, what will be the state of the world, all those kind of things, the signs that we can recognize for the coming of the Messiah. Now, one important point, and this is something that has been raised by other panelists today as well, is the state of the Muslims at that time. So when it comes to the end times, the Muslims would be in dark and challenging times. It would be a time when the representation of Muslims in the media, for instance, as we see today, there's a lot of extremism associated with Islam. There's a lot of negative coverage of Muslims in the media. Here in Canada, Islamophobia has increased significantly in the last 2 years. And when we look at the Muslim world, Muslim leadership, Muslim governments, they are engulfed in sectarianism, conflict. There are, in some countries, practically no rights for women. They don't have the right to even choose what to wear. And, there are groups like the Taliban, and recently there was a group called ISIS or Daesh, which bring terror. There's this, the moment you mention caliphate, you get this images of terror and violence and brutality. So this was to be, according to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was a time of decline. This was to be a time of decline for the Muslims. Nothing was to remain of Islam except its name. Nothing would be left of the Holy Quran except its rasm, which is just a plain text or reading of the Quran. Mosques will be full, devoid of guidance. So we have a lot of these signs for the end times that are mentioned in Ahadith. But the question that I wanted to take up is that when the time, like I mentioned in the types of prophecies, what is this time? When was it going to occur? And when we look at the prophecies in more detail, we come to learn that the Holy Prophet ﷺ told us that the time of the coming of the Messiah would be the end of the 13th century of Islam or the beginning of the 14th century of Islam. And this is mentioned in this verse of the Holy Quran, or at least hinted in this verse of the Holy Quran as well. The Quran, chapter 32, verse 6 says, God will plan the divine ordinance from heaven unto the earth, then shall it go up to him in a day, the duration of which is 1,000 years, according to what you reckon. Now, these 1,000 years are in addition to the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in the first 3 centuries, because the Holy Prophet ﷺ told us clearly that the first 3 centuries of Islam are the best of the centuries. He said, خيركم قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم, which means that the best of people are those living in my generation, then those coming after them, and then those coming after the second generation. So if you exclude the first 3 generations, then you have the next 1,000 years, which is a period of decline. And those, by the way, in another hadith, the 1,000 years, the middle period, so to speak, has been referred to as the Fayjun Awaj, is a time of a group of crooked people. So if you take out the first 3 centuries, add the next 1,000 years of decline, then you come to the 13th century. Regarding the middle period of 1,000 years, the Holy Prophet ﷺ even said, "Laysu minni wa lastu minhum," that those people are not from me and I am not from them. So 1,000 plus 300, it brings us to the 13th century, 1,300 years. That would be the time, the end times, that would be the time of the coming of the Messiah and Mahdi. So that is the 13th century, or the end of the 13th century, or the beginning of the 14th century. The Holy Quran also refers to this time as the time of the Akharin. These are the verses that I recited in the beginning of my presentation today, and they refer to a group as the Akharin, right? The translation of these verses is as follows: He it is, that is Allah it is, who has raised among the unlettered people a messenger from among themselves, who recites unto them his signs and purifies them and teaches them the book and wisdom, although they had been before in manifest misguidance. and among others from among them, وَآخَرِينَ مِنْهُمْ, who have not yet joined them. He is the mighty, the wise. So this is also a reference to the latter days, to the end times. And when this verse was revealed, the Sahaba naturally had this question, the companions naturally had this question, who are these akhareen? Who are these people who are not from among them, who have not yet joined the Sahaba or the companions? And they asked the Holy Prophet ﷺ this question. They said, O Prophet of Allah, who are the akhareen? And the Holy Prophet ﷺ placed his hand on the shoulder of Hazrat Salman Farsi radiyallahu anhu and said, Law kana al-imanu in the suraya lanalahu rijalun aw rajulun min haulai. Even if faith were to reach the Pleiades, some men or a man from among these, that is, those of Persian descent, would surely find it. So if you look at all of this evidence, as I've mentioned, a time of decline, 13th century, the latter days, the akhareen, and you look at this, then you can come to the conclusion that this is the age. These are the end times. And this is a time when faith did reach to the Pleiades, and as a man was needed to go and find it and bring it back to earth. Now, this hadith, interestingly, does not just tell us the time of the coming of the Messiah and Mahdi. It also refers to the place of his coming, because this is referring to those who are of Persian descent, and the Persians were towards the east of the Arabs. And this is further specified in another hadith where the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that he would descend in the Manarat al-Bayda'i Sharqiyya Dimashq, towards the east of Damascus, next to a white minaret. So his coming was towards the east, right? Towards the east of Damascus, not inside Damascus, towards the east of Damascus, next to a white minaret. There's another hadith that even says that it will be India. A group of community will appear in India who will do jihad, and it will be the Mahdi whose name will be Ahmad. So this is again telling us the place for the coming of the Messiah and Mahdi, which is towards the east. But the amazing thing is that the Holy Prophet ﷺ did not just stop there. In order to help us identify the correct Messiah, he gave us even further signs. For instance, in one of these, he says, Kaifa antum iza nazala ibnu Maryama fikum wa imamukum minkum. How will you be when the son of Mary descends amongst you, and he shall be your imam from among you? So another one of his signs is that he will be imamukum minkum. He will be your imam from among you. He will not be someone else. He will not be coming from outside the ummah. He is someone from the ummah, from within the ummah. He is your imam. Now, a lot of people look at this hadith and they say, well, this is referring to Ibn Maryam. This is referring to Ibn Maryama is the words used. Isn't that a reference to Jesus, son of Mary? Well, we believe that according to the Holy Quran, it is clear that Jesus, son of Mary, has passed away. And this, I have a few minutes left, so I won't be able to get into all this, all the evidence that is pertaining to the death of Jesus from the Quran. But if you have a question about that, I can definitely address it. So Jesus, the original Jesus, has passed away according to the Quran. So the latter day Messiah was supposed to be someone who is coming in the likeness of Jesus, someone who would be similar to Jesus or the Messiah of the Jews in many ways. So as Jesus was the Messiah for the Jews, this latter day Messiah would be a Messiah for the Muslims. Another point to note is that some scholars, and Yasir Qazi was mentioned earlier, I also looked at his series on the end of times. He mentions that the Imamukum is referring to the Imam Mahdi. Now, we believe that Imam Mahdi and Messiah are one and the same. And the ahadith point that out as well. And again, the evidence can be shared with you if you are interested. Just a little plug in here. If you are interested for further study on this topic, there's this book, Jesus in India, which is available on alislam.org that you can look at and study. Now, when we look at all of this evidence, we as Ahmadi Muslims believe that it all culminates in the person of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him. We believe him to be the Messiah as well as the Mahdi. He was born in the year 1835 in Qadian, India. He claimed to be the Messiah in 1889, and he passed away in 1908. And you can read more about him, learn more about him if you're interested on alislam.org. After he passed away in 1908, we have a system of caliphate, spiritual caliphate or khilafah. And currently, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, our Khalifa, is Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad. He is referred to as Khalifatul Masih, the fifth. He's the fifth in order. So he's the Khalifatul Masih, the fifth. And again, you can learn more about him on alislam.org. I have 2-3 minutes left. So I wanted to just conclude, with one sign, one of the signs for the coming of the Messiah and Mahdi. Like I mentioned earlier, there are many, many signs for the coming of the Messiah and Mahdi. And I've discussed only a few. One essential sign is the sign of the solar and lunar eclipses. To save time, let me just read the English here. There are two signs for the truthfulness of our Mahdi. This is the Holy Prophet ﷺ saying, there are two signs for the truthfulness of our Mahdi, which have not manifested for anyone since the creation of the heavens and the earth. That is, during Ramadan, the moon will be eclipsed on the first night among the possible nights for the lunar eclipse, and the sun will be eclipsed on the middle day among the possible days for the eclipse of the sun. Based on this prophecy, back in 1894, a few years after Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, made his claim, in the year 1894, during the month of Ramadan, the moon was eclipsed on the first of the three possible nights, which was the 13th, and the sun was eclipsed on the second of three possible days, that is the 28th. We Ahmadi Muslims are those Muslims who have accepted the Imam of this age, the Imam who was sent for the end of times, for the end times. The time, the place, the signs for his coming have all been fulfilled based on our belief and our perspective. We believe that it is essential to believe in him because the Prophet ﷺ said, if you see him, فَبَايِئُوهُ, pledge allegiance to him, even if you have to crawl over ice, because he will be the Khalifa of Allah, the Mahdi. And I end my presentation with a quotation of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. He writes, God Almighty, observing the condition of the earth and finding it filled with disobedience, sinfulness, and misguidance, has appointed me for the propagation of the truth and for the reformation of the people. It was when the 13th century of the Hijrah was about to come to an end and the 14th was about to begin that under God's command, I sent out a call through written and verbal announcements that I am the one who was to come from God at the turn of the century for the revival of the faith, to reestablish the faith which had disappeared from the earth, to draw the world to reform and righteousness with the power bestowed by God and with the force of his hand, and to remove their errors of doctrine and conduct. Within a few years of this, it was disclosed to me plainly through revelation that I am the Messiah who from the very beginning had been appointed for the Muslims, and also the last Mahdi who had been appointed by divine decree to come at the time of the decline of Islam and the spread of error. This last Mahdi, who was to receive guidance directly from God and was to present the heavenly banquet afresh to people, and whose advent had been prophesied 1300 years in advance by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, is none other than my own self. You can read more on alislam.org, and we have a lot of free books on the website. And this particular book, Invitation to Ahmadiyyat, it talks about all of this evidence that I've shared in much greater detail and a much more comprehensive manner. It's available in multiple formats. Check it out on alislam.org if you are interested in learning more about the Ahmadiyya perspective on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khairan. And thank you so much for the recitation of the Quran in the beginning. That was very lovely. So if all of you have been following along, it is very, very clear that Muslims, we are not a monolith at all, and that we have diverse perspective. And through this through all of the presentations, it is very clear about, the existence of differences, nuances. And so I think hopefully this will allow us to think more about, these important themes and topic. So we are ready to get to a lot of good things. We're ready to get into the dialogue part. It's going to be hard because there's a lot of questions. We don't have a lot of time. And so for the audience, I've seen that you've been putting your questions in the Q&A. You can keep on doing that. if I cannot answer all of them, I sincerely if I cannot post all of them, I sincerely apologize, because the whole thing about this event is that when we ask a question, it might be targeted to one speaker, but because there are different, sects, it would be good to actually have others chime in whenever possible. Okay, so without further ado, let's go to the Q&A. I also received or social media requests about the questions from Twitter. Let's get to the first question that is kind of like several questions combined. There's a Jesus theme in here. The Jesus theme is Isa ibn Maryam. And so the speakers, various speakers have talked, in brief about Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam. And so Isa, for those of you who are joining who are non-Muslim, Isa is Jesus. That's how we say it in Islam. And so here is the question, all combined. Was the crucifixion of not a reality? Is, for the Sunni perspective, for example, even in the modernist perspective, is Jesus coming back? Or has Jesus passed away? So there's all these questions from audience that like, wait a minute, did he pass away? Is he coming back? Was the crucifixion a reality? So if I can ask all of the, let's start with Dr. Hashmi first, because this was actually directed to him first. Dr. Hashmi, in the Sunni, maybe traditional modernist perspective, is Jesus, the 2,000-year-old prophet from the past, coming back as the Messiah? What are your thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much. So yes, according to the traditional and traditionalist Sunni perspective, the idea is that Jesus did not die or was not killed on the cross, but rather was raised up to the heavens. There was really a substitution theory that came about, that someone in the likeness of Jesus was crucified, and that Jesus will return at the end of time. And that's the second coming of Jesus, which I discussed in my presentation. You are correct to say that many or most Sunni modernists reject this view and believe that the Quran says that Jesus did die and that there is no second coming, and that the Quran does not mention the Mahdi or the Antichrist, no clear mention of the second coming. And so modernists tend to be skeptical or reject all of these. But yes, and so I do see in the questions, why is it that we say that Jesus died? Well, there are a few verses that I would point to, verse 355 of the Quran, verse 5117, and verse 1933, all of which in their literal meaning do seem to say that God is the one who caused Jesus to die. And so what people who affirm this say is that what the Quran is denying is that the Jews, by their own agency, and it's obviously a specific group of Jews, not all Jews, but those specific Jews did not succeed in plotting against God and against God's will kill Jesus. And it's going against this kind of Talmudic polemic. And that's the context of the verse that is often used to say that someone was killed in his stead. So that is the dominant view amongst modernists, I would say. But this is definitely a conflict between people who follow the traditionalist paradigm and the modernist paradigm.
Okay, so just to clarify, in the modernist paradigm of Sunni, there is no substitution theory. And for maybe the audience who might not be familiar with substitution theory, I think this is the idea that Jesus was the one who was supposed to be on the cross, but then was kind of like switched for another person. Is that the case?
Yes, that's exactly the case, that someone's likeness was, Jesus's likeness was thrown on someone else. There's a dispute about who exactly was substituted for Jesus. Sometimes it's a disciple that was a good follower of Jesus. Other times it was the enemy of Jesus or the one who turned against Jesus. So there's a difference of opinion on that fact, but the idea is that Jesus himself was not killed. That's the traditionalist paradigm.
And the modernist is that Jesus was actually put on the cross and passed away.
Yes, exactly. That's the dominant viewpoint. Now, of course, modernists
are diverse.
Are diverse, and so, but I would say that this is a very dominant viewpoint amongst modernists.
Okay, very interesting. And I actually would like to bring in maybe Dr. Takim, Dr. Andani, and also Imam Farhan Iqbal, because I think this part is actually a very important question. And the reason why I kind of want to clarify the different perspective a little bit more is because this can be that point of sectarianism, right? When we think about like the sectarianism, the even religious persecution, this happens often in that whole realm of determining whether Jesus or not Jesus is coming back, who is it, you know, and especially as it pertains to also the role of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whom some Muslims believe that he is like the final of all prophet, and then other Muslims believe that there will be ummati nabi, which is like other prophets but within his fold. So Dr. Takim, any thoughts like from the 12er Shia perspective on Jesus?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my talk, the Shia perspective, generally speaking, from the majority of the scholars, is that Jesus did not die on the cross; it is still alive. Verses in the Quran that may allude to the death of Jesus is interpreted as referring to that when he comes back, he will die, because as I mentioned also that everybody will die eventually, including Jesus, and even the Mahdi too, because the Quran is pretty clear. They did not kill him, they did not crucify him, they did not kill him for sure. It is very, very categorical in that sense. Of course, as you are aware, sectarianism basically arises from the different perspective of different sects having their own views. Islam is very, very pluralistic on most things. Although I would venture to say that most Muslims, at least within the 12 Shia community and the Sunnis, would agree that Jesus actually did not die and that he was raised to the heavens, and that he will come back at the end of time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Takim, for your perspective. I'm going to go to Dr. Andani and then go to Dr. Imam Farhan Iqbal. Dr. Andani, in the Ismaili perspective, because you didn't really touch upon Jesus in your presentation, is he the Messiah of the Muslim? Did he pass away on the cross, or is he coming back? What are your thoughts?
Yes, so this is actually a topic I've discussed in many other interviews and YouTube videos, and even in an article. The Ismaili view on Jesus, based on the earliest available Ismaili sources, was that Jesus died on the cross, and that what the Quran is denying is the agency and the boasting of certain Jewish enemies of Jesus, whose claim to have executed and hung Jesus is found in the Talmud, for example. So the Talmud claims that the rabbis put Jesus on trial, they stoned him, and then they hung him. The Quran is just responding to that and saying, no, you did not do it, right? Because the verse in question like has sort of like the embedded pronoun, like they, i.e. these people of the book who broke the Sinai covenant, they did not kill and crucify Jesus. The same group is accused of slandering the Virgin Mary, for example. We find that slander in the Talmud. The Ismailis have always maintained that Jesus, in his bodily sense, did die. His spirit did not die, right? So because the verse says God, two times it says God caused Jesus to die. 2 times it says God raised Jesus. So what was raised? Jesus' body was raised. Well, the Ismaili view is that Jesus' spirit, his ruh, was raised to God, like the spirit of martyrs. And the Quran says those who die in the way of God, 2 verses say those who die in the way of God are alive. Don't call them dead, right? Don't say that they're dead. So that's how we have always read that verse. Now, based on this, then the Ismailis have never believed in a literal second coming of Jesus, although it was a very popular belief, right? Many Muslims do believe in it. 12ers believe in it. Sunnis believe in it. So what the Ismailis will do often is when you have a dominant belief like this that's already settled in people's hearts, but like you want to explain that it's not literally true, what the Ismailis said is they said, okay, Jesus, one of his names in the Quran is the Spirit of God, the Ruhullah, right? A spirit from God, Ruh Minhu. So what does that mean? So Jesus, his mission symbolizes the spiritual dimension of God's religion. Like that's what Jesus came on, what he taught about on earth. Jesus brought the spirit of the law of Moses. So then what we could say is that the second coming of Jesus means that in the future, in the period of the Qiyamah, the spirit, the ruh of Islamic law and all the religious laws will become publicly manifest. So it's not that Jesus himself will come back, but what Jesus stood for, the spirit behind the letter of the Sharia, that will manifest. And in that sense, you have a sort of allegorical second coming, but not a bodily second coming.
Okay, so this is very interesting. I'm learning so much from all of you, and you brought the concept of allegory. And I'm going to bring this to Imam Farhan Iqbal because, you know, Muslims in general, I think maybe, I have to be careful, maybe not 100%, but most Muslims believe that Jesus was indeed the Messiah for Bani Israel. And so how do you reconcile the different opinions about, you know, Jesus in the Quran, the interpretation that he was not that he did not die on the cross, with the interpretation that yes, he did die a natural death like everyone. So how do you bring this from an Ahmadiyya perspective?
Right. So from the Ahmadiyya perspective, just to add to what Dr. Hashmi quoted some from the Quran, Jesus Christ died a natural death. That's an important point. Chapter 5, verse 117. By the way, whenever I quote the Quran, I'm actually counting Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim as the first verse. So just look at the previous verse. So chapter 5, verses 117 to 118, where Jesus, for instance, says, "Falamma tawaffaytani," when you caused me to die. It's a very clear statement that Jesus has already died, because the word tawaffaytani, where God is the subject and man is the object, always means death or the taking of the soul. Add to this chapter 3, verse 56, where Jesus says, "Inni mutawaffika," where God says, "Oh Jesus, Ya Isa, inni mutawaffika, I will cause you to die." So that's established. The other point is that when he was put on the cross, we don't believe that it was somebody else. We don't believe in the substitution theory. We believe that he was, in fact, put on the cross. But when the Quran says, "Wama qataluhu wama salabuhu," it means that he was not murdered by the opponents and he was not killed on the cross. So if somebody is put on the cross and taken down alive, that means that they were not crucified. The definition of crucifixion requires that a person is put on the cross and dies on the cross. From our perspective, he was actually alive because he was there for only 2.5 to 3 hours, and it doesn't take 2.5 to 3 hours for everyone to die on the cross, because a cross requires a longer time, and that's a longer argument. But just to briefly mention that he was taken down alive, and he actually migrated from that area, and he ended up in India, and there's a tomb in Srinagar, Kashmir, India, which belongs to Jesus Christ. If you want more information on this, again, the book that I was referring to in my presentation, Jesus in India, talks about all of this evidence in detail. So do check it out.
Okay, so again, this is very interesting. So in the Ahmadiyya perspective, the idea is that Jesus did eventually die, but not on the cross. So there is kind of like a mission incomplete in the past that he needs to still do. Okay, you see, very, very different from all of the different sects. So my goodness, I'm a bit overwhelmed with how many questions we're having. If you actually see a Q&A that is directed to you, I mean, and if you feel free, like you wanted to answer it, do so. I didn't think that it would be necessary, but here's a question that I wanted to ask. So would it be fair, so this question is, would it be fair to say that some of the fascination around the end times is just driven by a desire to make political despondency of Muslims more digestible, but actually it's a way of shifting away any responsibility to bring about reforms in Islamic tradition, or even shifting individual responsibility to achieve a higher level of morality? And this is actually asked to Dr. Hashmi, so from a Sunni perspective, but I think Dr. Takim talks also about individual reformation. So Dr. Hashmi, do you want to just answer this right quick?
Sure. Thanks so much. So it was a very incisive question where he pretty much, or he or she pretty much answered the question. But what I would say is that, yes, I agree. The intent or the purpose behind a lot of this these apocalyptic ideas is precisely for many people to instill a status quo of political quietism. Now, ironically, the same material is often used for violent revolutionary activity as well. So it has this kind of dual-sided effect. But yes, part of it is that what you're going through, the oppression that you're experiencing, is part of God's plan and design, and that there will be this figure that will come, but you have to wait till that figure comes. And so that can lead to this kind of offloading of that responsibility. And I also think that, and this is where my critique comes in, is yes, I'm concerned by that aspect, because I don't think we should just be blindly obedient to tyrannical authority. But at the same time, I do understand the Sunni traditional discomfort with violent rebellion as well. So that's a valid aspect. But I think that the part that really concerns me is the fact that I think it goes against the Quranic view of the Quranic eschatology, which is all about that inner struggle within ourselves, which is what I think it's the end times in the Quran is really meant to signal within us.
Thank you, Dr. Hashmi. And Dr. Takim, did you wanted to add to that about the inner? Oh, sorry, you are muted. You're muted.
Yes, sorry, yes, okay, now not. I think it's a gross mistake for us to think that the idea of the Messiah or the Mahdi came about because of political consideration or for whatever is connected with the status quo. We need to remember that the idea of the Messiah is not new. Not only is it readily available in both Sunni and Shia Hadith literature, the Quran does hint to us that there will be somebody, or at least we wish to establish an earth whereby the meek will inherit the earth, and that those who are oppressors will be removed. Then we should also remember that the first time historically that we know of a community that proclaimed that their leader was in hiding and that he was a Messiah was the Qaysaniya group, which was there almost quite early in the beginning of Islam, during the time of Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, who was actually the son of Imam Mahdi. So this is not something that developed during the Umayyad time or later because of political suffering. There was a lot of political suffering which helped fuel this idea. But initially it was not the political consideration as much as waiting for a savior who will establish the kingdom of God, if you like, to use a Christian term, on earth.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Takim. So I actually want to bring two questions together. There's a recent question on Gog and Magog. And there's also a question on the beast. And there's a lot of kind of, Dr. Hashmi talked about, maybe this is, I'll give this question maybe to Imam Farhan Iqbal and also Dr. Andani, maybe Dr. Hashmi, if you want to contribute, also Dr. Takim. Sorry, it's very hard to do this because I want to hear from everyone's perspective. But what is this Gog and Magog, or the beast? Is there like supposed to be like a monster that's coming at the end time? Like, what's happening here? Maybe we'll start with with Imam Farhan Iqbal, and then we'll jump after. Yeah, Gog and Magog, beast. What is that?
Right. So, when it comes to Dajjal, when it comes to the Antichrist, when it comes to the Gog and Magog, when it comes to all these, we believe that this is in reference to the Christian missionaries and philosophers, European philosophers in the end times. And this is because I will give you a couple of quick arguments. I don't want to take too much of your time, but just as food for thought. In the Quran, chapter 19, verse 91, Allah says, "Takadu samawatu yatafattarna minhu wa tanshaqqul ardu wa takhirul jibalu hadda." The heavens might well nigh burst thereat, and the earth cleave asunder, and the mountains fall down in pieces. So this is in reference to Christian belief and deification of Jesus Christ. And it says that the heavens may be destroyed, the earth may be destroyed because of this belief. And there's no one else in the Quran regarding which it is stated as such. So we believe that it's the latter-day Christian belief which was going to become predominant according to the Ahadith, that is referred to as the Dajjal, because the word Dajjal, it's a term that means deceiver or deceivers, plural. And so latter-day deceivers, which includes philosophers and missionaries who want to distort people's faith or take people away from Islam, this is what this is referring to. So, and the fact is, the verse that I just quoted, there is no other group or belief system that regarding which the Quran says something as harsh as this, that the heavens might be destroyed, the earth might be destroyed because of this belief system. And there's a hadith which says, Yaksiru Salib, that the Messiah will come and break the cross. Again, it is referring to the predominance of the Christian belief in the latter days, which is something that we are already observing in this day and age. And then the Gog and Magog also are mentioned in chapter 21, verse 97, as Dr. Hashmi also pointed out in his presentation. He says, it shall be even so that when Gog and Magog are let loose, وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ هَدَمِ يَنْسِلُونَ, which means they shall hasten forth from every height and from the top of every wave. So they will also be predominant. So it's not possible that we have Dajjal predominant, we have Christians who are predominant, we have Gog and Magog who are predominant in the end times. All of these groups are actually one and the same. From the Ahmadiyya Muslim perspective, Gog and Magog, which are predominant, are referring to Christian nations, referring to Christian ideology that is going to be spread in the whole world. It is referring to, that's the same thing as Dajjal, that's the same thing as the Antichrist, and this is the same thing as Gog and Magog. So all of these are references to the same group of people found in the Quran and Ahadith. We do not differentiate, and we're not waiting for three different groups to come. Otherwise, this would be self-contradictory. This will start to not make sense anymore.
Okay, so just to clarify, basically the core idea is that it's that kind of like, it's the mistaken idea of deifying a human being. So I think that's what you're trying to communicate. And so that is part of the kind of like the piece about what is kind of the teaching that basically you argue is not what Jesus originally came to teach, because Muslims believe that Jesus is just a prophet of God and not a God himself. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Doctor, I don't know if Dr. Andani would like to chime in, or Dr. Andani, would you like to chime in on the concept of Gog and Magog, or the beast? I'm combining everything in once because there's like, several questions.
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, we have within the Ismaili tradition, again, spiritual, esoteric, ta'wili readings of these notions. So yeah, in the Quran, Gog and Magog are some sort of a force or army that if they're let loose, something will go wrong. So one understanding we find within the Ismaili tradition is that Gog and Magog refer to what you could call spiritual particles or spiritual forces. So, we live in a physical world, right, of matter and laws of nature, but there's a spiritual world that we also inhabit. Like the spiritual world is sort of coextensive with this world. We just can't perceive it, right? And in that spiritual world, there are powers, right? The spiritual world and its contents can influence the physical world. And there are good influences in the spiritual world, right? Which is responsible for many discoveries, mathematics, scientific, religious, spiritual discoveries. And there are other forces in the spiritual world that can have a bad effect. So Gog and Magog is just a collective term for all these spiritual forces, spiritual influences, whether positive or negative, right? And people who've attained to certain levels of spirituality, although they may be in this world, some people can access the Gog and Magog forces. And some people can tap into it and use it for good, and others could tap into it and use it for bad. Any type of power, just like physical resources, right? Like nuclear power or whatever it is, they themselves are very value neutral. And then you can do good with it, you can do bad with it. So there are spiritual resources that work the same way. And the coming of Gog and Magog in the day of resurrection, in the understanding I'm speaking about today, it means that these spiritual resources, whether they can be used for good or bad, they're far more available in the cycle of Qiyamah. And one manifestation of this that's very clear today is look at the New Age movement that we have in our world, right? New Age spirituality. Witchcraft has come back, right? Psychics is still a big business. So there are all sorts of occult practices that have always been part of human life, but they were not as widely available in the pre-modern age as they are now. And people can immensely benefit from some of this stuff, but people can also do immense harm. So these spiritual forces that modern occultism sometimes taps into, that is what Gog and Magog would be.
Okay, very, very interesting, very different answer. So we only have 15 more minutes, and we have so many questions, but maybe the one question that I think we can answer next is tied to the whole idea of caliphate, khilafat. And that's because that's a big thing, right? I mean, like when we think about, you know, the Sharia creep, or, you know, Muslims are trying to get a caliphate established, like, and especially that there are prophecies about caliphate in the end times. Some, you know, some Muslims believe in this. Any thought at all from any of the speaker on what does that mean? Do all Muslims wait for a caliphate or khilafat? Maybe I'll ask this to Dr. Takim first, and then Imam Farhan Iqbal and Dr. Hashmi, if you want to contribute to the concept of caliphate. Yes.
First of all, I think it's important for us to understand that although the Quran does use the term khilafah, it uses it in a very different context than the institution that was established. The caliphate that we know of historically was an institution that was established by the Muslims, for the Muslims, even at a particular point in time. There is nothing sacred or divine about it. So when Ataturk, for example, abolished the caliphate, there was an outrage almost in the Muslim world, as if he had destroyed something that was genuinely from the Quran or from the tradition of the Prophet. This was, as I said, a political institution which worked very well for parts of Islamic history, which does not really work in a modern world. We don't want to go into the details, but that would just take too long. But from a Ismaili Shi'i perspective, the Shias talk more about the imamate than the khilafat. In other words, the imams are, for the Shias, they are the ones who are the true successors to the Prophet and holders of authority. So for the Shias, it is the khilafat is a political institution, but not a religious one, because it does not have any religious basis. So they always talk of the imamate, and perhaps one can talk of the imamate and the khilafat joining hands only once in Islamic history from a Shia perspective, which is when Imam Ali became the caliph. So he was the Khalifa and the Imam at the same time. For a very short period, Imam Hassan was also the same. And one can even venture to say that this will occur again when the Mahdi, the Messiah, comes back. Imam and the Caliph, in the sense that he will be ruling the world on behalf. And I think that also we have to distinguish very briefly between power and authority. For the Shias, the Caliph has the power, but doesn't have the authority. Whereas the Imam has the authority, and at least in theory, even the power.
That is very interesting, Dr. Takim, and I think it's good that you kind of distinguish the political history of caliphate, and then there's the more spiritual connotation of that. And I think I'm going to bring Dr. Hashmi in, and then end with Imam Farhan Iqbal. And then I just want to answer one more question if we have the opportunity. Yes, Dr. Hashmi, any thought on whether, from a Sunni modernist perspective, are you waiting for a khilafat? Because I think maybe traditionalists would.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right that the difference would be that the Sunni tradition would see it, or the traditionalists would see Khilafat as rising more organically, perhaps even indicated in the Quran. There's a debate, but yes, modernists see this as more of an ad hoc creation. And so they are all conflicted as to whether or not they would call or looking for the Khilafat to return today. But I just wanted to quickly answer the previous question, if I could. Is that all right? Because I think they did ask me specifically as well about what I think of Gog and Magog and the beast. So I think here there would be a difference between me and some of the other panelists in the sense that I take the historical critical approach where I'm looking at the literal sense of scripture. That's what I'm most focused on. Now, I do think that here, when it comes to Gog and Magog and the beast in the Quran, there's only one verse for each of them that's really referring about the punishment. And it's very elusive. So here, I think we have to use an intertextual approach and say that the audience that this was addressed to probably knew what was being referenced, because Gog and Magog and the beast both come from a biblical or parabiblical tradition or text, a textual tradition, or oral tradition even. And I would say that's what's probably being referenced. Now, of course, that does cause problems for a more modernist leaning person about how do you take that, because, but what I would say is that I understand the direction that some other panelists are going, which is more of like esoteric interpretation or symbolic interpretation. The modernist makes a similar move. It's still a figurative interpretation that's taken, but I would say it's less of a symbolic or esoteric interpretation, but more of a taking it as hyperbolic language. In the sense that the way I understand reading the Quran is that when it's describing the end or the hour, it's using all sorts of hyperbolic figurative language. The skies will, be destroyed. The mountains will be destroyed, will turn into wool. There'll be a fire, there'll be a smoke, there'll be Gog and Magog that are released. The beast will. So I think it's just stressing in this way, in this figurative language, at the end is coming. You can't imagine what it's like. So it's using all of the expressions that people know of. And so that's how I kind of take it. But I think the key point is that it's not Gog and Magog and the beast are not precursors to the end, but they are the end. That's where I think my interpretation would differ from how it was traditionally understood. So thank you. Thanks for letting me do that.
No, that is awesome. And thank you so much for actually doing that. That's great. That is the nuance that is very important in this discussion. So tying to the caliphate, so Imam Farhan Iqbal, your community, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, you are currently under a caliphate. So what does that mean? Do you vote differently? Do you govern yourself differently? What is that all about? Tell me.
So Khilafat from the Ahmadiyya Muslim perspective is actually based on the Holy Quran, chapter 24, verse 55. God says, وَعَادَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Allah has promised to those among you who believe and do good works that He will surely make them successors in the earth as He made successors from among those who were before them. So Muslims have clearly been promised that there will be successorship, and we believe that the first four khulafa, the Rashidun, were a fulfillment of this prophecy that Muslims will be promised this caliphate. But now, in the latter days, in the end of times, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, we have another caliphate which is on the same pattern as the first four khulafa in Islam. And this is according to a prophecy in the Hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ talked about the different phases. He said that there will be prophethood, then there will be caliphate. After that, there will be a tyrannical monarchy, and then there will be despotism. And then eventually, he said there will be khilafat on the precepts of prophethood. So he was actually prophesying that there will be a caliphate in the end times after. And so we believe that the Messiah and Mahdi who came after his passing, we have a system of caliphate, and currently we have the fifth caliph. You talked about, you asked about voting and those kind of things. There is a committee that is set up, and once the one Khalifa passes away, there is an election for the next Khalifa. And he's the one who leads a funeral prayer for the previous Khalifa who has passed away. But we believe that this is a divinely guided caliphate. So God inspires those who are members of that committee to vote for the person whom He has chosen as the Khalifa. And that's why we refer to him as the Khalifatul Masih. He is the Khalifa of the Messiah, which is Mirza Ghulam Ahmad.
Okay, interesting. And so, and when I asked about voting, the idea, I think the political caliphate is very different from your conceptualization of caliphate, because in your community, Muslims live in different countries and still.
Right. We don't believe that we don't have a political khalifa.
Okay.
He's not the head of state. He's our spiritual khalifa. In that sense, yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, we have 6 minutes left. Dr. Andani, would you like to contribute to the concept of caliphate, because you have the Ismaili Nizaris have the current Imam Aga Khan?
Yes, so in the Ismaili Shia understanding, and the Twelvers would agree with us on this, the fundamental caliphate that God has bestowed is not political in its essence. The fundamental caliphate of God is a Quranic idea. Adam is appointed as Khalifa by God on earth. And there has been a spiritual Khalifa on earth since Adam. When Adam died, his son Seth became God's caliph on earth. Now, the term we Shia use for this is imam, but the spiritual caliphate and imamate is the same thing. The idea of a political caliphate is something that was really invented by the proto-Sunnis, and it's the Umayyads and the Abbasids who first claimed this status, and they actually did claim to be appointed by God, and the ulama didn't really agree with them, and the Sunni concept of caliphate as a purely political institution came out of a negotiation between the Abbasids and the ulama and sultans and commanders and so on. Now, in the Ismaili view, the institution of imamate, that is God's spiritual caliphate. Imam Ali became that imam as soon as the prophet died. He was not really the fourth, he's the first imam. And there's always been an imamate on earth before Imam Ali and after Imam Ali. And for us, the living imam, who again would be God's caliph in the spiritual sense, would be Shakrim al-Husseini Aga Khan IV. That being said, we recognized, Aga Khan III recognized in his lifetime that the abolishment of the Sunni caliphate, the Ottomans, would be a bad thing for the broader Muslim world. And the then Ismaili Imam, although he has the full moral claim to political authority, he actually fought unsuccessfully to preserve the Ottoman caliphate, because he still felt that the Sunni world would be better off if there had been an Ottoman caliph rather than not. So although we don't believe in the principle of the Sunni caliphate, Ismailis have always worked for the overall benefit of the ummah, even if it means our imamate putting aside its political rights. So while the imam has the political moral right to a political authority, the imam chooses whether it's actually good to exercise political authority or not. And the current policy of the Ismaili imams is that the imamate will be apolitical. The imamate will not run a state, and it will not impose nation-state laws. It will still serve as this divinely mandated office, but without resorting to modern politics to achieve its goals.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andani. I think that's a very good clarification from the Ismaili perspective. Actually, because we only have 3 minutes left, I'm actually going to ask one question and then close it. And I'm hoping to get all of the answers from all of the speakers. So I don't know, Dr. Andani, if you're not busy, you can feel free to turn your video on. And I just want to tell the audience that I am very, very sorry if we can't go over every single question. It's just, it would be a miracle to do so, which is not happening right now. So hopefully you can follow the speakers, you can check on YouTube, you can get in touch, you can check more of the websites, the resources from the different sects of Islam here. And so my last question here is, I'm going to ask all the speakers and you can only answer with one word. Okay, are you ready? Dr. Andani, are you ready too? Okay, so if you had one word, what would Allah want Muslims to be? One word, and then I'm going to ask the question. You're going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. Go. Oh, you're muted.
Ethical.
Ethical. I love it. And Dr. Imam Farhan Iqbal?
United.
United. And Dr. Hashmi?
Godly.
Godly. And Dr. Andani?
Compassionate.
Compassionate. Compassionate, ethical, united, godly. I mean, these are all virtues. Actually, I was taught since I was little that a Muslim is someone whose hands and tongue people are safe from. So always be kind, always be gentle, always be compassionate. And so there it is, everyone. The unity and the message that I will leave you all with. Even though we are diverse, we are united in peace and ethics and good values. Thank you to all of the speakers speakers. May Allah bless all of the speakers and the audience for participating. In the meantime, please do follow the speakers on Twitter. Check out their YouTube channel. You will also get a recording. And so please do spread this message of love, peace, anti-sectarianism, and interfaith harmony. And I pray that all of us, regardless of being Muslim or not, will spread peace and love wherever we go. And wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, speakers and audience. And this is it. We are done with the webinar.